All right, welcome back to Thesis Academy. Again, my name is Dr. Jordan Newton, and I'll be kind of walking you through steps. Hopefully you've seen the introduction video to get used to kind of what we're doing here, but I'm going to jump into context one, and so let's get started. All right, what we're going to talk about today in video 2, part 1, is thinking about the thesis project and how it is that you locate a project. And so let's jump right into some basic stuff. How do you find a thesis project? Remember that with a thesis project in the Doctorate of Ministry program, it's not just about writing some kind of paper about something you're interested in. If you're passionate about spiritual formation or discipleship or some aspect of leadership development or servant leadership, that's not necessarily a thesis project. You need to do something tangible that can be measured with real people. And so we need to find a project. And so some general wisdom just before we get going too far in this is that number one, there are ways of figuring out what it is that you should do. One of the things that I strongly recommend is taking time to reflect, not only on what is your work world, but just some of the other opportunities that life seems to be handing you at this present season. Talking to other people, maybe at your job, in your family, or in the place of your ministry, is a good way to kind of see kind of what maybe the Holy Spirit has been churning in you. In other words, there's probably places to take time to not only consider what the Holy Spirit has been saying to you, but also just what opportunities are in front of you. Another really important question is, what are you really passionate about? And what is your vision for your ministry context or your work context? And this is pretty important because, just as a reminder, to get through a Doctorate of Ministry project, to write 200 pages and to spend hundreds of hours not only in the writing part, but in the doing the project part, you're going to be giving up a lot of hours at night, early in the morning. And so whatever project you decide, it can't just be something that satisfies, what just needs to get done. It needs to be something that you're really passionate about, something that you want to see happen, and something that you just want to exist. This can, of course, be part of your normal, week in, week out work week, something that maybe you want to improve or fix, but you've got to have a lot of passion and interest to really see this thing done. So considering, what am I doing already? And then also, what do I need to know? Where do we need to go from here? So these are some general ways of getting started. And maybe one last thing, there is a huge distinction that we need to make from the very beginning. We are not really after what do you want, sorry, let me start over. A key distinction that we want to talk about here is that it's not necessarily what do I want to do. I'll start over again. Let's make a key distinction here. Really, we want to figure out what is it you want to do in ministry and with the vision and life. Where do you want things to go? Because some people start out with the Doctorate of Ministry project thinking, what do they want to write about? What are they curious about? Or what do they know a lot about? But that's not necessarily a thesis project. And so we're going to go ahead and start jumping into some of the context here. This is where I'm going to start using more of those play pause it features to kind of pause the video and ask you some questions. So as you recall, I'm going to be introducing you to one of the 4 contexts. The church context would be the first one. The second one's going to be the community Christian school. The third one's going to be the Leadership Institute, and the fourth one is going to focus on kind of a denominational study. But what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a backstory. And what we're going to do is pause and think, what are some questions that we have? And then what's maybe a possible hypothesis of what's going on and really what the problem might be or what a solution might be. So we're going to need to hear the backstory to kind of make those conjectures. And then I'll kind of back up after you've kind of made your selections and kind of wrote in what you think the problem is or what would be your first take. And then I'll kind of give you some more guidance to figure out what would a discovery thesis project look like and what would an experiment thesis project. And real quick from video 1, a discovery thesis project is where we're trying to uncover why the current situation is the way it is. We're looking for interviews or survey material. We want to understand why things are the way that they are, or maybe we want to go do research somewhere else to figure out how other people have found successful ways of doing things, and we want to study their methods so that maybe later they could be implemented. An experimental thesis project is where you're actually going to do something and measure its successfulness. So those are, again, from video 1, the 2 kind of different thesis projects. But let's go ahead and get started with our first context. All right. Context number 1, Young Church USA. So our first ministry context is going to be about the local church, and I'm going to go ahead and read you some backstory on this church. Okay, so this church that we're going to be talking about is really growing pretty well under the leadership of Pastor Jerry. Pastor Jerry is 34 years old, and his church is basically increasing 25 to 30 people each year, and most of that is new conversions. And so they're actually a church that's growing, and they're growing basically because of their evangelism and Jerry's strong preaching, which is really good for outsiders and new people. The problem, though, the problem / opportunity that's happening here at Jerry's church is while they're growing and the Sunday services are really full, their midweek Bible studies, their Sunday school, all the other program stuff that they offer to the community is not really growing at the same pace. In fact, many of them are declining. The Sunday schools are not attended very well. The youth ministry is doing pretty well. The youth pastor in charge is somebody who has a lot of respect with the people, and the youth ministry is doing okay. But the middle-aged people, that group of, the 20s to the about 50s, they're not seeing a lot of those people go to Sunday school. The midweek programs don't have much of those people. But the person who's in charge of the outreach and kind of that community inreach is a man named Dan, who's 55 years old. And Dan has a lot of rapport. He actually used to be the preaching pastor. And basically, the groups that Dan has created have been very successful with the older community, but they have not been engaging for some of the new converts and some of the younger aged Christian people. So the church is doing pretty well. It's growing in numbers. That's good. The Sunday services, continue to fill up. Multiple services now are going, and Jerry's very pleased with that. But as he looks around to see, these people who are there Sunday, they're not really coming to anything else. And so at one point he initiated that we should be starting some small groups. And those were started by Dan, the associate pastor, who's in charge of kind of that community outreach. And again, he had success about gathering some of the older people. Some of the youth group age things were going well, but that middle age, he's not getting those people to come back to the church for anything else besides Sunday services. So Jerry has been at the church for a while, and he's been kind of although he's new, it's been about a year and a half, and Jerry has been doing some talking to some of the deacons and some of the families that he's getting close to, and they feel like that there just might need to be some changes made. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and ask, what additional questions would you want to know to really assess the problem of ministry? Yeah, I think some important questions maybe would be to figure out, where is this church situated? Is it urban or is it rural? Because that's going to affect people's pace of life and maybe how available they are to come to midweek things. Really, what's the church size is not a number that I gave, or what is the staff size? How many other people are there? What's Jerry's relationship with Dan, since those seem to be the people that are really important right here? And, maybe the denomination would have some bearing on this one as well. But there probably would be some things that we would want to know more about. But if this is the information that you have, that Jerry's a good preacher, he's somewhat new, the church is growing under Jerry, and a lot, and his sermons are really engaging and people are liking those, but he's not getting people to move beyond Sundays to midweek things or Sunday school programs or things that would really disciple and develop and make a stronger bond of community. He's a little bit nervous that people are just going to come on Sundays and that's it. So what should Jerry do? So this is where we're going to develop a hypothesis. What do you think the problem might be based on the information that you have? And again, we're going through these steps because this is how it works in real life, is that we're in a context of ministry. We have a work or a ministry context that we're in, and we kind of know it backwards and forwards, but we need to articulate what's going on and we need to develop a hypothesis. So what would you say a hypothesis for Jerry's church? Okay, good. So coming back, some things that I think at the theory level is that current leadership does not know how to reach their people. They know how to reach the older group, but maybe not some of the younger families who are now attending. And that seems to be evidenced by the inability to get those people to come to any of their functions or stay in some of their functions. So that leads to a second theory that perhaps there are some outdated models that are being used. That might be evidenced by the fact that the older community loves and attends what's going on, but the people in the middle age demographic are being totally missed. Perhaps Dan, who's in charge of this ministry, is very good at reaching people of his age, but is not really that apt at reaching people younger than him. Which leads perhaps to a third point, a third hypothesis, and that would be that maybe new programs need to be launched and they might need to be strategized clearly. So you might have reached different conclusions than just those. Again, the whole point is not necessarily for you to get the right answers or to see everything the same way, but it's to kind of see the straight line thinking process. And so let's move on to what would an investigative or discovery thesis project look like? What would it look like to uncover the why? What can you think could be done? Okay. Okay, good. I've got two basic ideas, and there certainly are more. Whenever you step into a ministry problem or opportunity, and this is certainly both, it's a problem that they're not engaging more people into midweek or Sunday school activities, but it's also an opportunity. The church is growing. There are usually in these moments about 15 different thesis projects you can do. And that's sometimes the challenge, is sifting them out and figuring out what should be done. But investigative, how to do a discovery thesis project? Well, if we're needing to uncover the why, one thing that we could do is that we could, do a series of interviews of the church attenders who are in those age demographics of 20 to 40 and ask them about their experience in Sunday school and small groups or any of the midweek activities to see what their experience was. Did they attend them? For how long? What was the problem? Was there a leadership issue in these things? Is there a timing issue? Are they providing too much or providing too little? Maybe the problem that Pastor Jerry needs to address is to really figure out what that problem is. Is Dan the problem, or is Dan a good-natured person who's got a great reputation, who just needs to adjust some small things? Maybe Dan just needs coaching on how to reach the next generation. We won't know until we do some investigation. So one kind of thesis project would be interviews and surveys to learn about this congregation and why they're not attending. Maybe the issues of why they're not attending are outside of the church entirely. Maybe some of them are attending midweek things at other churches. Maybe a lot of these people have healthy spirituality that they're doing at home with their kids. That's probably not the case. We shouldn't be too idealistic, but maybe we need to figure out why. Second thing, another idea of a thesis project that's investigative would be to go look at other models of successful midweek things at similar sized and similar styled churches that are reaching out and bringing in young families and see what are they providing. Can I talk to the pastor? Can I go over there and can I learn their methodology? Can I see how they do it? And not just get the broad overview, but all the details. What are some of the key people involved? How do they deal with communication? What's happening in the spaces? Are childcare provided? And to really get a full picture of what successful ministries are doing, because maybe some of those ideas could be implemented in your church. That would be another investigative thesis project that you could do. Okay. So let's now look at an experiment. What would an experimental thesis project look like? Okay, so here are two options of an experimental thesis project. One would be for you to implement something brand new and you would test its successfulness. And maybe the test could be about how many people begin and how many people end. Did you retain enough people? If it was something that you were trying to build community or spiritual formation, you can include some kind of spiritual formation assessment that people took before they started the new group and then after to see did they stay and did they grow. That would be effective. Another one might be that you start something that's pretty similar to what's been done and something new, and you do a comparative study. Which ones retained people and which ones did people grow in? That would be another idea. But this is where thesis projects are born, in a problem or opportunity where you're trying to look around and see how to improve it, and realizing that this might take research, and realizing that a lot of ministry and a lot of work in the secular world is done without real research. People have ideas, they do them, and they're not actually sure if they're effective because they actually haven't measured. Measurement is the key. All right, brothers and sisters, thanks for tuning in. We're going to move over to part 2 next.